Back AP Research students, I'm Eli.
I'm Grace.
And today we're going to be teaching you how to create the best survey for your research project.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So the first thing I want to share with you guys is just how you're using Google Forms. Okay, so right here you see I've got a blank Google form. This is pretty straightforward, but if you want to add a question, you click add question. We're going to explain to you guys all the different types of questions later, but these are all the different types of questions you can add. If you want to add a section, which we'll also go over, you click here. Some important information to keep in mind when you're doing this. First of all, make sure that in collect email addresses when you're doing this is selected to do not collect. Let's just face it, guys. When you ever fill out a Google form and it asks you for your email, it asks you to sign in, that's just annoying. You want to make sure that this is as easy as possible for the people that are doing it. You know, they're taking the time out of their day to do your survey. So you definitely want to make sure that that's turned off. And as far as that goes, that's about all you need to know for settings. And we're going to explain questions later. So let's just jump right into the types of things you want to have on your survey, which is probably why you're watching this video. So very important. First thing you want to have on your survey is going to be consent and then information regarding your research project. So as you can see here, I've got definitions for the things that I talked about in my research. This is actually the exact form I used for my research project. I included my research question. Now, important thing to keep in mind, when I actually did this, when I distributed this this survey, I actually did have my name and my school on here to introduce myself. But when I submitted it to College Board, I did have to remove that later on because you cannot have any identifying information. So that's just something you want to keep in mind when you're doing this. You definitely have to remove that later. But it is good to kind of introduce yourself so people know okay, they're an AP research student. You know, it's a pretty, just state kind of what your purpose is for doing this. You may want to include things like what kind of people should be taking this survey. So for instance, I was studying Generation Z, so you might want to have the types of people in your description. Now, realistically, guys, people probably aren't going to read all of this if you're just being honest, but you just want to include it just to make sure that the information's on there. Okay, finally, you definitely want to have hotlines because you want to make sure. Okay, let's just be real, guys. A lot of these surveys probably aren't gonna emotionally trigger people unless you're talking about something we had someone in our class this year that had questions about domestic violence on hers. So she definitely needed something like this. Regardless of what your topic is, you're gonna need hotlines. So for mine, I put the suicide and crisis hotline. I put the mental health hotline. And you want to add stuff that's kind of catered towards your research project. So for instance, mine was just kind of about social media, so I didn't really include a lot on mine because it wasn't a super specific emotionally triggering topic. But for our friend in research who had questions about domestic violence, hers was more detailed. She had specific hotlines like the domestic violence hotline, so you might want to cater that towards whatever it is that you're studying. Realistically, people probably won't need it, but it's good to have. You have to have it. You just have to have it on there. And finally, this is really, really important. This is how you don't get sued. You want to make sure that you have a consent statement. Okay, important note for the consent statement. If you are doing people 18 and above, you only need to have consent for the person. However, if you are doing people who are also 18 and below, you do need to have some kind of parental consent. Now, I actually did have 18 and below, but you'll notice I only had one consent statement. And that is because I decided to kind of combine the personal and parental statement. And so I included it somewhere in here when I said, yes, right here. I said it right here. I said, by checking off the statement below, I understand this means my parents consent to me taking this survey. So I kind of combined it into my paragraph talking about the consent. And I had one consent statement. So you can totally do that too. I think if you're doing an emotionally triggering topic on minors, you definitely should have a separate thing because you might actually want to get parental consent. But for something that's, mine, where it doesn't really have anything that should be too triggering for someone taking it, I would say you can combine it just to make their life easier. But you definitely need to have a consent statement on here and make sure there's only like one response for it. Sometimes people make the mistake. I've seen this on surveys that are like on Reddit or whatever, where they have like a yes or no option. Don't put a no option. It's either like yes or like why are they taking the survey. So just make sure that there's only one option. And that's about the first part you should have on your survey. And yeah. So Eli, why don't you go ahead and talk about some of the demographics and preliminary information section of the survey?
Now, in regards to demographics and participant research, you want to understand the most about your participant's background. However, of course, being on a Google form, you're not able to ask them in-person questions. Now, you might want to collect things such as gender, sexual orientation, age, and or ethnic background. As you can see within this research paper and or survey, we collected three of those things, such as identified gender, identified ethnic background, select all apply, of course, as well as something in regards to other languages they might speak, as this survey discussed high school teachers with accents. In addition, if your research is something within a specific area and or research location, you might want to be inclined to answer and include something such as this, which includes a map split up of the San Fernando Valley into four separate quadrants, in which participants can identify in which quarter color they are identified in, then select the section they are located in to make sure once again you filter out participants who will apply to your survey. You can also ask some questions regarding how long they have been working within their profession, as seen here.
All right, Eli, thank you so much for sharing that helpful information regarding demographics and preliminary research and stuff like that. So, just general question advice before we get into what types of questions you should be using that will benefit your research specifically. First of all, the biggest piece of advice when you're constructing your survey, guys, don't make your survey too long. People are taking the time out of their day to take your survey. They aren't obligated to do that. And I know that you think your research is interesting, so you're going to think that other people will want to take it. You're wrong. You're wrong. They're not going to want to take it. So you just want to make sure that you make things as easy, as simple as possible. So some ways you could do this is, first of all, limit the amount of qualitative questions or open-ended questions. So these are questions where people have to type in the answer. I saw some really bad ones on Reddit that had like 10 of these questions. You don't want that. That's bad. Typically, surveys are going to be quantitative research, which means you're going to have questions where you just like check something off, or you like just, have a multiple choice answer. Like it's going to be just something like that. You don't want to have a lot of questions where you're writing stuff in. It takes time and people will not finish your survey if you have a lot. So another important thing to keep in mind so your survey is not too long is just because a question is related to your topic doesn't mean it's related to your RQ. This is pretty important because you don't want to have extra questions that you don't need. I definitely feel like there are some questions that were on my survey personally that I didn't need, and I didn't really find that out until I was kind of exploring the data a bit. And it's possible that might happen to you, but just to avoid it, I would say a really good strategy for this is just to ask yourself, like, so what, whenever you're making a question. So when you are making a question on your survey, make sure to ask yourself what information you're getting from that question and like how you're going to use that to answer your RQ. Like, okay, so now I know that like people prefer peanut butter and jelly sandwiches over ham and cheese. So what? How does that help me answer my question about the trash crisis going on in Siberia? Oh, no way, it doesn't help. So just make sure that you only include stuff related to your RQ, guys.
Now, guys, in regards to trying to figure out what type of question is perfect for you, we're going to go through each of them. Now, first, let's say you have a blank document as seen here. You can click Add Question, and then up here you have multiple different sections, including something such as Short Answer and Paragraph, in which participants are given the opportunity to write a text or answer as long as they want. Now, that is more qualitative data, and we're focusing on a little more quantitative. Now, in regards to quantitative data, we have some things such as regards to dropdown. Now, dropdown is actually a multiple choice question in which it is a lot of answers. So you put as many as you want. This could be used for dates or times, and they look really wide on here, but once you actually go onto the document itself, it's condensed into a very small format in which you can click on it and kind of see every single answer without taking up the whole page. Now, next up, it's important that if you're trying to ask a participant if they've experienced something, a yes or no question, you don't want to jump around the idea. You want to ask that specifically. Now, you can format that through, once again, a multiple choice question, except only have two answers, yes and no. Now, let's say you wanted to ask the participant a little bit more of how they would rate something. There's two major questions that are fundamentally amazing for this. That being linear scale questions, in which you are able to select a lowest and a highest, and then have them identify from a 1 to 5, or a 1 to 7 scale, if you want a 1 to 7 Likert scale, as well as something called star rating. Now, star rating is actually a little bit different, in which you're only allowed to write down what the question is, and then the participants just have to right off the bat either choose 1 star, 2 star, all the way to 5 stars being the highest. Now, moving on a little bit, let's say you're trying to get a multiple selection of answers from our participants, as they might qualify and identify with more than just one. What we actually recommend is that you do checkboxes questions, in which, similar to multiple choice, participants are given multiple different options in which they can actually select multiple. That way, they're not stuck to just one answer. Now, let's say that you actually want participants to identify only one answer, and you don't want to give them that freedom. You instead should be using the multiple choice question, as previously identified, in which, although seeming almost identical, participants are only able to select one. Afterwards, they will have to move on. Now, if you have to actually answer and ask the same question multiple different times without having it to be repeated or separated, you can use something called a multiple choice grid. A lot of multiples here, in which you can ask stuff such as liked on Instagram and create rows of answers. And then the columns will be evenly distributed throughout all of them. So, as seen here, I put liked my Instagram story, and then throughout the columns, I put strongly agree all the way to strongly disagree. But then once the question is formatted, it automatically applies it to every single row. That way you don't have to create multiple different questions. And lastly, if you instead want to get that once again, but similar to the multiple selection, you want to get different answers from participants, you can use the checkbox grid. Same system, you create rows, writing down what you would like. And then you can actually create your columns, adding more or adding less than for whatever is best for your question and your format.
All right, thank you so much, Eli, for telling us about those different types of questions. Okay, so final section. This is kind of optional depending on what your study method is going to be. But basically, if you are also including an interview as part of your research, you might want to include, and you're doing an opt-in method, this is how you do it. So basically, once you actually finish the actual survey questions, there might be a final section where you ask them something like, hey, if you feel like, this topic strongly resonates with you, you ask them, would you be interested in participating in a Zoom interview? In which case, they would have the option to say yes, no, or maybe. Okay, if we're being honest, guys, if they provide an email at all here, you're going to send them that follow-up email regardless of what they say. This is just so they kind of feel like they're given a choice, but you're going to send them that email regardless. And you're going to have a short answer text for just their email. I would say don't ask them for their name or any personal information. And final important note just for the survey in general, you're not asking any identifying information. Even when you're doing the interview or referring to them in your paper, you're going to be referring to them as participant 1 or however system you want to do it. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and that is pretty much everything you need to know about survey design. I'm Grace Mishcott, guys.
I'm Eli.
And thank you so much for tuning in to this educational program. We hope you enjoyed it. And yeah.
Get 5s on those exams. Good luck with it.
Yes, ma'am. You guys got this. You're going to rock it.